Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our last Sage Intacct webinar of this year, the latest updates in Sage Intacct 2018 Release 4. I am Megan Manrique, and I will be your moderator today. Before we jump in, I'll briefly go over how to use our webinar console. I know a lot of you have experienced this one already, but just in case we've got any newbies on the line with us, the orange arrow on the right side will let you toggle the control tray open or closed. And at the bottom of that control tray, you'll see a chat window. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar via the chat function. We'll get to most of them at the end. And then, of course, if there are any that we don't get to, we will follow up with you afterwards as well. Additionally, on your GoToWebinar console, you should see an area for audio settings. If you're calling in through your telephone, please choose the Use Telephone option. And alternatively, if you're using your computer speakers, please select the Use Mic and Speakers option. And lastly, I want to note that today's webinar is being recorded. So we'll send out a link to the slides as well as the on-demand recording to the webinar within about 48 hours. So definitely keep an eye out for that message if you're interested in accessing the webinar after today or sharing it with any of your colleagues who couldn't make it with us live this afternoon. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. First up, we have Brenda, who is a senior manager on Armanino's consulting Sage Intacct team. She has over 20 years of accounting experience in Big Four public accounting and in-house as a controller, where she led a Sage Intacct implementation for a very large global nonprofit. Additionally, we have Irene, who's a manager on Armanino's Sage Intacct team. She's got over 30 years of accounting experience and has been involved in implementing accounting software solutions throughout her entire career. She's presented on accounting topics, functionality, and business improvement, and has spoken nationally at conferences, including some of you may have seen her at the recent past Sage Intacct Advantage conferences. It's great to have you both with us here today, and with that, I'm going to pass the presentation along to get us started.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our conference today, our webinar today. Glad you were able to find time. We've got some exciting things to share with you. We're going to talk a little bit about the new Action UI, some inventory changes, general ledger updates that we're excited about, Salesforce integration, contracts, budgeting, and planning, some new tools that Intacct is offering, some changes in projects, some of the new workflow updates. As always, there's new things with platform and web services, some exciting things related to reporting and insights, and of course, administration and lots of tips and tricks along the way. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Action UI and the changes in the Action UI. So some very important upcoming ones, so take note of this, please. Intacct is no longer going to support the pre-printed, bottom pre-printed checks after February 28th of 2019. When you're setting up a checking account in the cash management module, that option is going to be going away. You will not be able to select bottom for pre-printed checks. For blank check stock, it will do the bottom check stub still, just not on the pre-printed checks. So if you have a check stock and their bottom pre-printed, go ahead and use those up and be prepared to change after February 28th of 2019. Another screen that is going away is the Select Bills to Pay screen. So that screen is in the old UI, they call it the previous UI. They're referring to the new one as the Action UI. So in the previous UI, Select Bills is going away after 2019 Release 1. So it's going to be gone and everyone will need to use the Pay Bills screen. So you'll want to get onto that as quickly as possible and get comfortable with that screen. There's some really nice features in the Pay Bills screen. So if you haven't ever looked at it, take a look at it. And of course, reach out if you have any questions. Another important upcoming change is related to fund transfer functionality in the charge card screens. So a little while back, Intacct no longer supported the ability to use fund transfers in the charge card transaction screen. It allows for the entry to be made, but they're not supporting that functionality. So I know depending on how long you've been using Intacct, some of you may be doing that where you record the charge card transaction, you do a fund transfer for the payment, and then you check off the charges in the payoff screen that were related to that payment. Intacct is no longer going to support that, but rather you need to do your charge card transactions, okay? complete the payoff, and then move it over to the accounts payable module and actually record the payment from the accounts payable module. You'll see that workflow on the screen. If you are using the fund transfer, it may work. It is working still for some clients, but it is definitely not supported by Intacct. So you'll want to consider changing your workflow to make sure that it is a supported process. New changes related to their Action UI. They added some legibility, so some darker colors. One of the first things I noticed was the blue plus icon next to the menu items. The green was gone. That was the first thing that I noticed. Where's the green? So there's a blue plus icon. More contrast within their icons. That sort of information. So they're trying to make it more legible. They said more fresh and a newer look. So a few changes related to that in the new Action UI this release. Up in the top right-hand corner where your support call-out is, they actually, Intacct removed the what's new from the drop-down. There used to be a little what's new in the menu there, and then it would list below that any relevant topics related to the screen that you were on. Intacct made that a call-out. So now what you see is a popular solutions item in the help menu. Okay, and then if you click the arrow, it calls out items related to, again, whatever screen you are. So the popular solutions is designated to, hopefully call something out related to exactly what you're working on at that particular time. So lots of new things happening with the Action UI. Inventory, Brenda.
Excellent. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
So inventory, there's two big updates to inventory in this release. So the first one is related to replenishment. So the new functionality here allows you to automatically generate a list of products available for replenishment. So what this allows you to do is when you're setting up your vendor, you can tell the system how much time that vendor needs to be able to fulfill your order. So you can see in the example here, we have one day of lead time necessary there. So once you have the lead time on your vendor, you can also set your replenishment level on your inventory items. So when it gets down to 1 or a dozen or 100, depending on what your burn rate is through that inventory, you set what the replenishment level is. And what this will allow you to do is it will allow you to then automatically create a replenishment order by generating a purchase order for you. So everything that has reached that replenishment level, you'll see it come onto the replenishment screen. Let me go to the next screen here, and we've got a sample of what the replenishment screen looks like. So down in the transaction grid, you've got all of your items. You have the ability to change which vendor you order from. So if you don't like that lead time or you need something shorter, you have the ability to change it. It shows you what the lead time is based on which vendor that you choose and what your inventory need is based on your required stock levels and what your reorder requirement is. You can edit the quantity if you want to purchase more or less. And of course, the price will extend based on what you select here. So once you've selected everything that you want to replenish, you can go ahead and create your purchase order, and then it will go through your normal purchase order approval process. So really a nice feature to be able to automate that inventory replenishment, have your hands on more information faster. It does require a fair amount of setup because we do have to update your warehouses, your items, your vendors, as well as doing some enablement both in inventory and purchasing. So we do recommend if you would like to enable this, that you do reach out to an Intacct implementer to assist you through this process. The other exciting update for this particular release is related to landed cost. So if you're not familiar with what landed cost means, it's an accounting term that means the total price of the product after it's arrived at your door. So this is going to include not only the price of the item itself, but also freight, insurance, customs, duties, handling fees, etc. Anything associated with the cost of procuring that item. So this has been problematic for some folks using the inventory module because a lot of times those invoices come in way after the original invoice. So then you're stuck doing some inventory adjustments and modifications and making sure that everything that you've got the right base price to then do your inventory valuation as you sell down that inventory. So with this new landed cost feature, you can do exactly that. It allows you, previously you had to do those manual adjustments, but now it's going to allow you to do it automatically. So on this next slide here, I've got a little bit of an example of what this might look like. So here you've got your original vendor invoice. You purchased your inventory on June 1st, and you debited inventory and credited your accounts payable. And then coming 2 weeks later, you receive your freight invoice. And this requires a landed cost clearing account. So you'll book that particular expense, and when you do so, you're going to link it to the original invoice. And that's how Intacct knows how to add those landed costs to your original item valuation. And then, so the inventory increase is actually going to post on June 1st. So that's an important thing to note, is that the inventory adjustment increase is going to be reflected as of the date of the original invoice. And that's because, as long as it's still in an open period, of course, the caveat there. And that's so that it will reflect correctly on your reporting. So again, this does require a fair amount of configuration in terms of configuring inventory, the landed cost fields, and as well as your vendor invoice. So if you would like to implement landed cost, please reach out to an implementer and they will be able to assist you. Back to you, Irene.
Great, thank you. General ledgers, a couple new things in the general ledger module. First is a new actual module they're calling dynamic allocations. This is a subscription-based module, so it's not part of your core. It's not automatically installed. It is a subscription-based module, and it allows you to do, as it says there, dynamic allocations. As you're all aware right now in Intacct, if you're using allocations, it is at a transaction line item level, right? You go into an accounts payable bill, you're going to expense that bill. On a particular line, you pick an allocation, and it allocates that line. So this is a true dynamic allocation where you're going to set up a bucket or account specifically to capture costs on your chart of accounts, and then you're going to configure the system to allocate those costs at a specific time period. So you'll pick the source, you'll pick the basis, how do you want to allocate it, as it shows there on the screen. The second step, right? You're going to go in and say, I want it to go to certain dimensions, certain accounts, etc. The target, where is it going to go? So how are you pulling it? Where are you pulling it from? And then where is it going to go? And then you'll have your result, of course, is your true cost of those allocated costs in Intacct. So a nice new module that they're offering. You can record allocations into a separate book for review before actually posting to your accrual book. So that's a really nice feature. So if you have a set of user-defined books, or you can create one even if you don't have one set up now, you can post that allocation to that user-defined book. You can have a report where you run your books with your accrual and the allocation. Yes, you like what you see, then you can just take the entry that was made in your user-defined book and copy it over, duplicate it over to your standard accrual book journal type such as GJ, and actually have then it post to your accrual book. So a nice feature, again, a periodic based dynamic allocations rather than transaction line item, which is very nice. All dimensions are included in the allocation, so you can use any of the dimensions, including user defined dimensions that you want in your allocation. So it's a nice new module that we're looking forward to using with our users here at Sage Intacct. That'll be that great. And Armanino, of course, all of our clients. Nice new feature. Again, subscription-based. So if you want more information, reach out to the appropriate folks and they can get you that information. Another feature in General Ledger is the management reporting book. That is also related to user-defined books, all right? So you have to set up a user-defined book, for example, and then there's a little checkbox, as you can see in the screen there, that allows you to indicate that it's a management reporting book. What that gives you the ability to do is post to a closed period without impacting your actual books. So if you designate a book as a management reporting book, you have the option to post to closed books. That's nice if you want to do projections into the future as well, or into the past based on something in particular, and then you can look at it before you actually have it in your accrual books. You can analyze differences between accounting treatments, right, in your prior period, so it gives you that ability to kind of analyze your data with those different sets of books. Management reporting books can be included or excluded in performance cards, financial reports, your standard reports in Intacct, custom reports, graphs. So they've opened it up to be available in all of those different areas in Intacct. So management reporting books, just another option to allow you to look at data, analyze data before you actually post it to your accrual books. And you don't have to. You can always just leave it in your management books, your user-defined books. You don't have to include it in your accrual books if you are not happy with what your analysis is. So a nice feature there. Advanced Salesforce integration enhancements in this release. Couple of nice ones in here as well. You can now use account transaction sync, all right, to migrate your users from CRM integration to the advanced CRM. So if you've got the standard CRM integration and you're upgrading to the advanced and you've got a lot of users, that's a really nice feature because you can migrate those users over. And another nice one is the ability to synchronize order entry historical transactions. So if you're thinking about Salesforce, you haven't integrated it yet, that's something that'll be nice for bringing over historical transactions into Sage Intacct. Price books now sync with the billing price list over in Sage Intacct's billing price list in the contract module. So they've got a sync that they've added between those two sets of books. There is now the option to do renewal billing templates on contracts in Salesforce. And then there's improved handling of merges and deletes, automatically correcting inconsistencies. So, you know, they're finding a few little glitches in the system when there's merging and deleting in Salesforce. And so they're looking at those and updating those and making sure that the mapping doesn't cause those sorts of issues on merging and deleting. A couple of other things is the sync override of standard field mappings. So as you can see on the screen, if you are doing a sync between Salesforce and Sage Intacct, you can override specific items on the actual mapping if you need to do that. So a lot more flexibility in how Salesforce and Intacct are talking to each other. Brenda, contracts.
All right, my favorite topic, contracts. So there's a number of contracts updates in this particular release, and a lot of them I would consider probably an ease of use enhancements, things that you've been doing manually up to this point that enough people asked for it to be automated. So this is a nice real set of enhancements here. So the first one we're going to talk about is the one to automatically reallocate revenue and expense schedules. So oftentimes it happens that after you've already sent out your renewal or your membership, that they come back and they don't want a portion of that. And you may have already recognized some of that revenue, even if they hadn't paid their bill yet. So this allows you to automatically reallocate those changes in contract values after the initial rev rec has already occurred. So previously, you had to, if you had to do this, you had to manually edit the revenue recognition schedule. And this is because under ASC 606, expenses should be amortized and revenue should be recognized over the expected duration of the contract. So if the contract terms change, either in terms of length of time or in dollar value, there's an associated adjustment that needs to be made. So this is allowed to be made on a schedule by schedule basis. So any of the revenue schedules that you have in the system, it allows you to basically redistribute that revenue. This can only be used if your revenue schedule has a recognition method of daily rate or straight line. So those are your only options, and you will not see the reallocate option unless you are in edit mode. So if you are in just view mode, or if you're actually creating the record and go up to more actions, you're not going to see the reallocate option. You do have to be in edit mode to be able to see that. Regarding the start date and end dates for these reallocations, if the revenue expense scheduled reallocation start date occurs after the last schedule period's actual posting date, or if the contract line is included in a multi-element arrangement allocation, the revenue reallocation start date will occur after the last MEA allocation's effective date. And if the contract line is using the event-driven recognition, the revenue schedule's reallocation start date will occur on or after the delivery date of that particular event. So it's always going to be after the last event that has occurred on that recognition schedule. So the adjustment will be posted at that time. The next one is the enhanced functionality for the multi-element arrangement negative value contract lines. So there's really several different types of negative lines, and they can be classified into the two big groups of debook, meaning somebody has decided they don't want that contract line item any longer and you need to debook it. Or it's a discount, meaning you're adjusting the price, but not the quantity. So when you have negative line types, the debook has a negative quantity and a positive rate, which of course is still going to result in a negative removal. And then the discount credit has a positive quantity and a negative amount because you're reducing how much they're going to pay. So in the discount credit instance, it will automatically reallocate to 0 and have no revenue schedule. But in the debook, it will have a revenue schedule because you need to de-recognize any revenue related to it. So this is actually introducing the concept of line types. So if you don't have any negative line types, everything is just going to be noted as a sale type. And that's the default in the system. So previously, the MEA allocation process only supported the first allocation that included a contract line. So now it will support subsequent allocations that include the same negative contract line. Both the debook and the discount credit contract lines will appear with negative amounts. And the amounts will appear in the available credits section when you select your invoices to pay. So the only difference between the two negative line types is how they're going to be treated in that multi-element arrangement. Because previously you had to go manually, you had to remove that MEA allocation, and then you had to go and set it up with the new one. So this allows, based on what kind of negative value you're posting, the system will automatically update the MEA allocation for you. So that's pretty awesome. Insight and control over hold and resume. So you can only place schedules on hold when the schedule status doesn't equal on hold. So if it's already there, you can't put it there again. And you can only resume schedules when the status equals on hold. So the on-hold date, the resume date, the hold memo, and the resume memo are going to be stored on the contract line object for revenue billing and expense schedules, so all across the board. And they also made them available for custom reporting. So that's a big one there. For the expense schedules, the hold date and hold memo are only going to be applicable when placing a contract line level expense on hold. They aren't available when you're placing a contract level expense on hold. So that's important to distinguish that this is on the line, not on the header. So previously, when you resumed a revenue schedule, the revenue for the past periods were automatically posted using the specified resume dates as the posting date. And now you can select to use either the revenue adjustment option from the associated revenue template, or you can select a different revenue adjustment type when you resume the schedule. And again, like with most of these updates, this is only going to be available if you are using the daily rate or straight line methods. So your options for how that adjustment is going to be handled when you do resume, you've got the option to either use the template default, which is going to use whatever revenue adjustment option you selected on the revenue template itself. Or you can override that and decide you want to do a one-time catch-up, which is going to set the scheduled posting date for all revenue that was scheduled prior to the resume date to the new resume date. You could do a catch-up and a distributed, and that's going to recalculate the revenue schedule term using the resume date as the start date and spread the total revenue amount across the shortened schedule so that any skipped periods are eventually caught up by the end of the schedule. Or you can also walk it forward. And the walk forward is going to regenerate the revenue schedule as of the resume date and push the end date out to a date that's equal to the number of days from the original revenue template start date to the resume date. So it's just pushing out the timeline as opposed to the delivery date. And the system will automatically prorate any partial periods. So that's a nice feature as well. Cancellation enhancements. So a couple different things have been updated here. So you can now retain the scheduled posting dates after the cancellation. You can split the revenue periods if the revenue doesn't equal the billed amount at the cancellation. And you now also have the ability to cancel and uncancel individual contract lines. So previously you weren't able to uncancel them, and that you had to re-enter it again and do the whole thing over. So this will kind of streamline that process as well. And you can also now cancel a contract line in an MEA without clearing the allocation. So previously, when you canceled the contract line, the system on the revenue schedule, it summarized all of your open revenue periods that occurred prior to the cancellation date into one amount and scheduled it to post on the day before the cancellation date. And it summarized all open revenue periods that occurred after the cancellation date into one amount, changed the status to terminated, and scheduled it to post on the cancellation date. So what happened was then if you subsequently uncanceled the contract line, the system didn't recreate the revenue schedule that existed prior to the cancellation. So now, since these things are not going to be deleted, they're just going to be marked terminated, you have the option to come in and change that back to open. And that way you won't have to regenerate that entire revenue schedule. The system will automatically leave all the open periods that occurred prior to the cancellation date as they are in the system, and it will change the status of all the open periods that occur after the cancellation to terminated. So it allows you a lot more flexibility, especially when those they come back and they're like, oh, did we say we wanted that line canceled? We were just kidding. We do want it after all. And then you'd have to go through and do all of that work again. So about the last item about canceling a contract in an MEA without clearing the allocation. So previously, if you wanted to cancel that contract that participated in the allocation, you had to clear it first and then redo it. So now what you want to do is, before canceling the contract line, create the new MEA allocation that excludes the one you're planning on canceling and use an effective date that's equal to or prior to the cancellation date. And then cancel the applicable contract line. So in that way, you can use the duplication feature. Extended flexibility for event-driven recognition. So this is when you have an event that's going to trigger when you recognize your revenue. So you now have the ability, when you're using a daily rate recognition method, to override the item's default delivery and deferral status when adding a contract line. So the important call out here is these are only editable when you're entering the contract line. Once you've saved that contract line, they're locked for editing. So if you forgot to do it, you're going to want to delete that line and then add it again. But it is going to be helpful for those of you that want to have a different deferral, either until everything's delivered or until just that one line item. If you change the delivery status from undelivered to delivered, the system will use the contract line start date as the delivery date. So that's the other call out there for you. So, as Irene mentioned, the new management reporting user-defined books exclude all associated user-defined journals from the closed book process. And so part of the reason why this upgrade has come about is because of the digital board book metrics. And all DBB accounts are always considered to be non-closing accounts that should never be included in financial statements. So it's reasonable that users should not be prevented from posting to these accounts during closed periods. So for example, you need to extend a contract's line's end date. The type of change causes a recalculation of MRR. But if the prior periods were closed, the past MRR couldn't be changed unless you open the books, made the change, and then closed the books again. So the new management reporting user-defined books excludes all of the associated user-defined journals that are used on that book from the closed book process. So that will allow users who are using the digital board book to make changes to these non-financial data in closed periods. So if you are scheduled, if you are subscribed rather to the digital board book for software companies and the contracts module, there is a data migration necessary in order to take advantage of this feature. So contact your account manager. The data migration is free. So let us know how we can help you if you want to be able to take care of this in closed periods rather than having to do all those manual workarounds. Okay, so a couple of the other updates to the digital board book are related to churn and renewal downgrades. So previously, if you had a renewal contract line that was deleted, the system deleted the digital board book entries related to the renewal for the source and for the child contract lines, but it didn't update the renewal downgrade or the churn account. So now the system will add a renewal downgrade or a churn entry as applicable, depending on which one it was, to the source contract line when posting date of the source contract line is after the original end date. So this is consistent with how they calculate the renewal downgrade and churn when a contract line is not renewed. So it's bringing everything into alignment there. So for the digital board book, when contract lines terms are different from the contract term, the contract line, say it's before the contract end date, the DBB metric will automatically post on the contract line end date +1. And when the contract line date is after the contract end date, the DBB metric will post when the scheduler processes the renewal and will have a posting date of the contract line +1 day. So some big changes there. And then the last updates we have on contracts today is kind of a bucket of things that didn't necessarily all warrant their own individual slide, but we wanted to make sure you were aware of. So user interface and label changes. In the last release, Intacct changed Journal 1 and Journal 2 to actually display the journal symbols that you had selected in the Configure Contracts page. So now they have extended that over into the Contracts module. So you will also see those journals there. We've also added dimension and dimension group filters to be used when generating invoices. So now you'll see all of the dimensions available in that module, available on the filter screen for your generate invoices. And then the last item is a calculation change in how quantity-based revenue is calculated. So previously, This was the revenue amount equaled your recorded usage divided by the total contracted quality multiplied by the MEA revenue allocation. And now it's going to equal the recorded usage divided by the remaining quantity times the remaining amount. So it gives you a more accurate revenue calculation there. All right, back to you, Irene.
Wow. There's a lot happening with contracts, huh?
A lot going on there.
Thank you, Brenda. Awesome. All right, Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning, a new tool that they're offering to go along with their product. Would like to call out that this is actually accessible outside of Intacct. So this particular module that they're implementing has a separate login, separate users than your actual Sage Intacct software. So good to note that there. The budgeting and planning is really to help you get out of Excel. If you're doing your budgeting and planning in Excel, this is definitely something you might consider. All of the dimensions are supported in the budgeting and planning module other than the employee dimension. And it offers a really nice workflow. So it uses your dimension terminology. So if you've renamed one of your dimensions, you're going to see that over in the budgeting and planning module, which is nice. And it allows you to really walk through your budgeting process in the software rather than in Excel. So you can create budgets in a lot of different ways. We'll talk about that in just a minute. You share, review, and update. So the approval process on the budgeting and planning inside of the module. Instead of emails going through your email to approve budgets and that, you can have it all happen within the tool. You can then export your budget data and use it elsewhere, including, of course, in Sage Intacct. So a really nice module that they're offering, again, subscription-based. So it is something that you pay for. And again, it is outside of, you access it outside of Intacct. So unique users and licenses are required for this module. Fully bi-directional, however, which is great. So between Sage Intacct and what they're calling the Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning tool. So that's nice. The two talk to each other. So you can have build a new budget, pulling it from Intacct, right? You can import actual information and run your budgeting reports within the Budgeting and Planning module. Or you can export your budgets and send them over to Intacct and do your reporting in Intacct, or both places. So it's bi-directional, giving you the ability to have actuals and budget information in both places, which is really nice. There is multi-currency company support. So if you have an environment where you have multi-currency, it is supported in the budget and planning module. And again, as we noted on the prior slide, the workflow is there. So creating, sharing, reviewing, forecasting, all of that workflow there over in the budgeting and planning tool, getting you out of Excel. If this is something that you're interested in, you can reach out to your account manager and they'd be happy to talk to you more about this new exciting module, budgeting and planning.
And just one thing to add to that, Irene, I know we've got a lot of our middle market clients on the line today. If you had previously evaluated any other budgeting and planning tools and determined they were too robust or too expensive for what you really needed, and you decided to stick with Excel, I think this is a great kind of middle of the road tool that gives you out of Excel, but doesn't, necessarily have the hefty cost or all the bells and whistles associated with what much larger organizations are using. So it's really aimed at that middle market tier. So we're real excited about this offering.
Yeah, great call out. Thank you for calling that out. Exactly. Perfect. Project, some exciting updates related to the project module. I am very excited about this first one. A couple of them in here, actually. Been waiting for some of these for quite some time. The first one is the ability to post statistical account data, like labor hours, to a closed period. So if you're keeping track of labor hours through statistical accounts, not using labor costing in the project module. So you're literally just doing some labor tracking in statistical accounts. You'll now have the ability to post those to closed periods if you need that functionality. It's easy to do. There's a couple of configuration settings, as you can see here. In the general ledger setup screen, you're going to enable posting of statistical accounts to closed periods. So that's the first checkbox. Okay, and then in the configure projects module, you have the ability to allow entry of timesheet date to a closed period for statistical posting only. So the call out here is that ability for posting statistical account data, not only labor hours, that's the example, like labor hours, right? So you may have other statistical accounts that you want to post to be able to post to closed periods. So that's what that checkbox is allowing you to do. But then that will talk to the project module if you have that installed with timesheet submission, and have that ability to have those timesheets post to a closed period if you need that functionality. So a nice new enhancement there related to that. Of all of the enhancements in this release, this is my personal favorite, and that is the ability to add general ledger transactions to project invoices in the project module. I've been hearing about this for a couple years, been excited to have this finally be here. Much needed functionality. So now in general ledger, you'll be able to tag a general ledger transaction as billable to a project, and then when you go into the invoicing screen in projects, you'll be able to select those transactions. So very excited about this. So your project dimensions are populated in general ledger. Okay, then it's enabled in the project configuration screen, where you're actually going to go in and configure and say, yes, you want general ledger to come over to your invoicing from the generate invoices and projects. Your general ledger entry has to include the project, the customer, the item, and the billable checkbox in order for it to move over to the generate invoice screen. You're familiar with that right now. If you're using the generate invoices in the project module, you enter in a purchasing transaction or an AP bill. You already know you've got to check those dimensions. Those have to be included, and nothing different from general ledger. So all of those have to be included. But what's really cool about this is in the general ledger, now when you select a project, it will populate this information. Yay! So currently in Intacct, well, not currently because it's in the new release, but prior to this release, if you chose a project in the general ledger, it did not populate the transaction with the dimensions in the project. But now when you add a project in general ledger, that will populate your department, your location, and all of that from your project setup screen. So that's really awesome. Generate Invoices screen has a section for the general ledger transaction, so you can pick and choose what you want to include. And your project summary tab, that's part of your project, also will be updated from general ledger transactions. One small call out there, the way that this is working currently in the system is that debits in the journal are billed as a positive number, credits billed as a negative number. So it is intended mostly for cost and expense transactions. The call out there, of course, is if you have a chart of accounts that have the native debit or credit backwards, that it might not come across correctly. So just a little call out there. But very excited to have this functionality. Glad to see that it's here in Intacct.
All right.
Workflow.
So we've got a couple of workflow updates. So the first one is Intacct has unveiled the nonprofit revenue recognition module. So this, Intacct has always had a revenue recognition module, and now with the new standards under ASC 606, really applicable to anybody that's got any multi-element arrangements, most common with our membership type organizations, like museums and the arts and other types of like professional membership orgs where you've got memberships under benefits, and ASC 958, which is those reporting changes going into effect for periods starting after December 15th. So we're nigh on that, the eve of that. So both of those standards, as well as the new grants and contribution standard that's going to be effective next year, are requiring nonprofit organizations to really look at and analyze revenue streams to ensure the correct treatment. So the nonprofit revenue recognition module will allow you to do both milestone-based revenue recognition, which is really helpful for nonprofits that are receiving conditional funding. And sometimes there might be other milestones that you need to meet before you can recognize that revenue. There's also installment-based revenue, and often that uses the straight line recognition method. The revenue may or may not be conditional. So for example, if you're hosting like a fundraiser dinner party where you're collecting payment for plates in advance. So once the fundraiser dinner is completed, you want to recognize that revenue associated with that event. So really flexible and allows you to automate that revenue recognition, which most nonprofits, I believe, are doing manually today when they have that kind of use case. So real exciting. If you'd like to implement the nonprofit revenue recognition module, definitely reach out to your account manager and they can get that scoped and set up for you. The other exciting update in terms of workflow is relating to the advanced modules of order entry and purchasing, and a little bit of inventory thrown in there for good measure. So you can now add your vendor stock numbers to your custom purchase documents. So if you're generating POs and you want to have that vendor stock number appear on that PO that you're sending to your vendor, you can do that. You also now have the ability to save transactions without reposting if you've only modified a non-financial field, such as your item description, your ship via. So if you're editing things like that, you will have the option to save at the top instead of just post. We also now have the ability, it's native within the system, that the system will lock invoices to prevent duplicate sending. So the user case scenario here is that employee 1 and employee 2 are both on the generate invoice screen at the same time, and they both have the same invoice checked off. So once somebody clicks print or email, the delivery report will not allow employee 2 to do the same thing. They'll get an error that says it's locked for printing or emailing because it's currently being edited by another user or it's in the process of being sent. So no more duplicate sending by accident to your customers. You can now post and print order entry and purchasing transactions in one step. So under more actions, there's that post and print option. Really awesome because especially if you're going to be printing these and not emailing them, you can do it all at once. And this last one I'm actually really excited about, or second to last, is choosing what's displayed after converting transactions. So currently, when you convert a purchase requisition into a purchase order, it's going to put you on the purchase order screen once you finish converting it. But if you have to convert a whole bunch of things, then you have to keep going back to the screen that you want to be on. So now on each transaction definition, you have a new option to decide, do you want to list the converted from transactions, or do you want to list the converted to transactions after you convert that? So depending on what your user's preferences are, it does change it for everybody because it is on the transaction definition, but that can be really helpful for workflow. And they also have now added a checkbox to be able to exclude items without activity in the item activity report. So especially if you've got a ton of items in there, that can be really helpful to make sure that you kind of get a tidier report there and you can exclude those items that you're not using currently. Back to you, Irene, for platform and web services.
Thank you. Hey, and just one other quick call out related to order entry and purchasing for those of you on the call. Order entry and purchasing is part of the core module. So you own those modules even if they have not been implemented. And the reason I wanted to call that out is because I had this happen recently where there was turnover in an organization and they had not ever implemented the core and purchasing and order entry module. They didn't know they even had them. So just because you don't see them on your screen doesn't mean that you don't own them. So if that's your case where you're thinking, well, I would like purchasing and order entry, I just wanted to call out a reminder, you do own the modules, and of course be happy to help you with the implementation of those modules if that's something that you're looking to do in the near future. Just reach out to your account manager. So just wanted to call that out. Thank you.
Great call out, Irene.
Platform and web services. So a couple things in here. This is a nice little feature for being able to use multiple transaction definitions at once for your smart links, smart events, and smart rules, custom fields as well. Very similar to what you saw in the custom report writer before, where you could create a custom report, and when you created the report, you could pick which transaction definitions would be available for that particular report. So that's what they've done here in smart rules and smart events. You can, when you set up a smart rule or a smart event or smart link, you can say, all right, where, and fields, custom fields, which is a big one. Where all do I want this to go? So you can add that custom field to all of your transaction definitions at the same time. You don't have to do a separate custom field or separate smart event for each of your transaction definitions. So a nice enhancement there. Another one is the synchronous API smart events, which allows basically the order of smart events on the same object. So you've got 3 smart events that are triggered, all right, on one object, such as your accounts payable bill. So you've got when a bill is saved, you want to make sure there's an attachment, and you want to make sure that the message is filled out. You've got some smart rules on that particular, or smart events on that particular transaction. What it allows you to do is synchronize those so that they happen alphabetically based on their ID. So something that programmers are excited about having, it's really just being able to control the order of multiple smart events so that it happens the way it needs to happen and the workflow still remains in place. Lots of little things. View and run reports created with the interactive custom report writer using read, report, and read more. And based on time, I'm not going to go through each of these, you guys. Just a reminder here, if you have any integrations, if you have this sort of information, make sure your development team or your IT team is going out to the developer site. All of the information related to API and web services on a new release is out there that they can get to and review that information. A couple other ones here. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each one. Read these. You'll get a copy of this PowerPoint or go out to the developer site and you can see all of these important API updates. Brenda, I thought this was much more important.
Yeah. So this is one. Another thing, so Intacct released quite a number of new modules requiring a subscription. So if you haven't been counting, there were 4 there, and this is the last one that we're covering today, is the interactive custom report writer. So first and foremost, the existing report writers are not going away. So breathe deep there. In terms of this new report writer, if you have reports that you have not been able to create with either the financial report writer or the custom report writer, this report writer is likely to fill that gap. It is so powerful. We've only really scratched the surface of it. Both Irene and I were part of the beta test that participated in beta testing this feature, and I feel like there's still so much more it can do. And we really haven't tested it. So yeah. The first thing that you'll notice is that it's not a wizard at all. So it's allowing you to really see how data is going to be modeled in real time. You can drag and drop fields. It's a lot like building a pivot table. So in the other traditional report writers, the first step that you do is you create and determine what objects you're going to report on. So here it's a lot more fluid. There's no specific set of order that you need to do these steps in. And I've included at the bottom here a link. It says compare report writers here, and that'll take you to a link in the help and tell you all of the different things that are available under each of these 3 report writers. And based on that, you can determine if you need to have this additional report writer. And if you do, please reach out and we'd be happy to get you set up with it. A couple of the other reporting updates. In addition to turning everything blue on our menus, as Irene mentioned, they've added a link to your favorite reports underneath the report center. So before, every time you clicked on the report center, it would take you to all of the reports, and there was no way to get to just your favorites. So that option has been added back into the new UI. You also have the option to choose your font size and spacing. So there's a little gear head in the top right-hand corner of all reports now. By default, it's going to be at the most compact and smallest setting. But if you're displaying in a large room or you want large print format reports, you can expand it to 2 larger sizes. The other thing that I really love is each report now opens in its own browser tab. And you're going to say, well, it always did that, Brenda. But it's a little bit different because now you've got the customize and view options. So you can go back and kind of change those filters and rerun it. It also allows you to to be able to run multiple reports at the same time. So before, it opened in a separate tab, but it overwrote whatever report you had up. So if you needed to compare 2 reports, you had to print one or open it up in another browser, or somehow cheat the system. So now it'll allow you to open as many reports as you want. The other advantage of that is you can have multiple reports running at the same time. So if you've got some complex or matrixed reports that take a while, you can have that run and run another report in the meantime. All right, and last couple administration updates before we let you go today.
Yeah, so advanced audit trail and HIPAA compliance, Intacct is committed to keeping that, HIPAA compliance as much as they can. A couple of call outs here. Now, if you do have some support with Sage Intacct and they slide into your company, as you'll see here, it actually will list the name on the audit trail, the name of the person that slid into your company. So that's kind of nice. And as far as what is not HIPAA compliant currently are copies of Intacct because they do not have the advanced audit trail functionality. So they're not in compliance with HIPAA. Your sandbox company, your copy company that you get during an implementation, as well as the 2 modules, the custom report writer, the new one, and the in Sage Intacct budgeting and planning, those are currently not HIPAA compliant because they do not have the advanced audit trail functionality. So something to call out there. And as always, they've improved their help, content, and training courses. Hopefully you've noticed that. These are the call outs from this particular release webinar, things that they've added in the Help Center, but I love how they're starting to add links to videos and that sort of information in their help context. I think they do a really good job of that whole process, so we're excited about that. So we've wrapped up all of the things that we've covered here on the menu. Megan, do we have any questions we need to address in the last 2 minutes?
We do have a few. If we don't get to all of them, we will definitely follow up with you guys after the fact. A couple of them came through actually for you, Brenda, about the report writer. To start, yes, just to reiterate, the existing report writer will not be going away. I know that was a little bit of a concern for a couple of you, so I just wanted to confirm that. And then the other piece of it, for the current reports that are not in the UI, will those be integrated into the Action UI, or are they going to have to create all new reports? Brenda, do you?
The UI just shows you the data that's already in the system in a different way. There's no migration required to switch into the new UI. You can actually just click that button in the top right-hand corner, switch into beta, yes, that little link, and it will bring you right there, and you'll be able to see all of your existing reports. So no change in reports by moving to the new user interface at all.
Thank you, Brenda. And I actually, we do have a couple more, but in the interest of time, I know that we're just about out of time. We'll follow up with those few more after the webinar with you guys personally. And then, of course, if anyone does have any additional questions that they would like to ask today, you are welcome to reach out to either Brenda or Irene or any of your Armanino contacts. We are all here happy to help you if you have any other questions or things that you wanted to follow up on. As you exit today's webinar, there is a quick survey, so definitely take a moment to let us know your thoughts on the content today. We love to hear that so that we can get it updated for you as we continue into the new year. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us. And of course, as always, Irene and Brenda, thank you both so much for the great content.
My pleasure. Happy holidays,
Thank you.
everyone.
Happy holidays.